So, in this episode of Deep Code, I want to talk to you about conspiracies. And in particular, I want to introduce some concepts or ways of thinking about the notion of conspiracies that I'm not sure are common currency, and I think, frankly, would prove quite helpful, particularly in the contemporary environment where, in the context of accelerating change and decentralized media and the war on sense making, ordinary linear sense making and the legacy sense making technologies that we used to use are breaking down. And so, not a nuanced, but frankly, a stronger frame of how to understand how the thing that is sometimes named conspiracy might happen might prove useful. So let's give it a shot. So I want to talk about conspiracies from 2 points of view. One is top down, the other is bottom up. And of course, then there's the relationship between them. Typically, in fact, I would say almost always, when we talk about the notion of conspiracies and particular conspiracy theories, we're talking about them from the point of view of top down. Right? So there is some group of people, usually relatively small by hypothesis, that has coordination between each other, has some level of explicit coordination, and an intent, a shared intent. And they're using planning, strategic planning, to coordinate some set of events in the underlying reality in a direction that they prefer, and in a way that includes some level of secrecy, either secrecy about their existence or secrecy about their intent or their methodologies. Okay, that's a pretty broad category. Right? It includes everything from for example, a surprise birthday party to what happens on the inside of a corporation that has trade secrets and patents and confidentiality, to certainly what happens inside intelligence agencies and inside things like organized crime. Right? These are all real world examples of something that fits the category of conspiracy and certainly is, or certainly happens. Right? Certainly there are surprise birthday parties. And so your friends might conspire behind your back to explicitly coordinate and keep it secret from you, and be able to deliver on an event where you are brought into a particular location thinking X was going to happen when in fact Y happens. And that's a conspiracy. Right? Now, the dubiety or the appropriate, I would say maybe skepticism or epistemological hesitancy around conspiracies that would be maybe properly categorized with the negative sense of conspiracy theory is when you try to load a larger level of scope, depth, complexity, duration, impact, or number of people into a top down conspiracy model. So the hypothesis would be, let's pick an example. Let's just go with September 11th. So you've got September 11th. Right? So we have an event. There's towers, planes, maybe, crash, probably. The conspiracy theory would be to say that there is some small group of people who, and small by the way, maybe thousands or four, who somehow have the capacity to put together a plan that involves a wide variety of different kinds of events and players, including things like NORAD and the Air Force or whoever the interceptors would be, passports to get terrorists onto airplanes. Like this whole complex thing could be scripted out and planned, executed on effectively, and done so in with enough secrecy that the magnitude of event that occurs, the underlying plan isn't released. It doesn't find its way out into the broader awareness. And the hypothesis is not plausible. The complexity of the plan, the number of people who must have been in on some aspect of it, the magnitude of the event, and therefore the willingness of people to sort of talk about it. It's not plausible to believe that the ability to maintain secrecy and the ability to actually execute on that level of complicatedness could be held. Right? So that would be the pro and con. The pro would be, yeah, you can. It's more like a surprise birthday party. The con would be, no, not plausible. And fair enough. Right? That's the dividing line. Now, you have a double whammy, and I think the double whammy is where things get really important when there's more of a desire to not live with uncertainty, not be like, we really don't know what's going on here, or the underlying causation of what's happening is complex and challenging and difficult to navigate. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to invent a narrative story that maps to the notion of conspiracies that do happen, that are real, and kind of wave my hands at the gap between the conspiracy and the underlying event. So let's say, again, for example, by hypothesis, I need to take no particular position on this. By hypothesis, let's assume that September 11th was not a conspiracy. But to grasp what did happen involves a lot. Like, you really have to do things like understand how geopolitics has been operating, and what are the real gaps in our policing mechanisms of who gets access to airplanes, and fill in the blank, right? It's a complex problem, and for which probably nobody really has enough expertise to be able to speak to that in detail. And of that some small subset of people who do, it's a big part of their lives to have that level of expertise and complexity, and to trust them is itself a meta problem. Right? Can I trust that expert to be telling me the truth? That's a real challenge in how we do sense making together. So what I might do is I might kind of sit with uncertainty. I don't really know what's going on here. That can be challenging when an event is consequential. Right? The Patriot Act follows from that. A large part of the arc of the entire world has been bent as a result of the event, and then the way the event is interpreted, and then how that interpretation has led to actions across the world. So what I might do is I might retroactively say, no, I have a story. I have a story that there are conspiracies, and that this is one of those. And I can map the thing that I do understand, which is how small secret groups can operate. And then what I do is I take the uncertainty and sort of sweep it under the rug of, okay, well, how did this particular conspiracy actually work? And bring into the foreground the aspects of evidence that I can identify that reinforce my perspective, and push into the background the aspects that don't reinforce my perspective, right? So I basically have a bias. I have a frame that I want to be true, mostly about making myself feel like I can understand and control my environment. And then I bullshit myself into believing it's true. That would be the sort of the very, very negative version of conspiracy theory. That is, I think, properly considered to be bad. Right? So I've got three flavors. I've got conspiracy theories that are conspiracies that are obvious and true, that happen. Surprise birthday parties, organized crime, intelligence agencies, corporations, etc. I've got conspiracy theories that are, in fact, me bullshitting myself. And they got this middle ground, which is a hypothesis, a proposal that a conspiracy is a good explanation for what is actually happening, that has certain levels of uncertainty and conditionality on it. And that's all just talking about top-down. But let's talk about bottoms-up, because that's actually more interesting. I don't know that there's a whole lot of conversation about bottoms-up conspiracies, and I'd like to add that into the vernacular. I don't know how much Brett Weinstein has put into the shared conversation, but a lot of this, frankly, I got from him, because evolutionary theory is the best way of grasping it. Well, it's a very good way of grasping it. From my perspective, it's the best. And the tool that I want to use is the eyeball, the human eyeball. So, or I don't know, a mammal eyeball. We've got, I don't know if you are familiar with some of the conflict back in the day in terms of intelligent design and evolution. And one of the objects of competition or debate was the eyeball, because from an intelligent design perspective, the eyeball is impossible to believe could have been constructed using random mutation and selection. Are you kidding me? This thing is incredibly complex. Rods and cones and photosensitive retinal cells and an iris that can constrict and focus, a lens, and connects to a optic nerve that connects back. I mean, the amount of complexity in that design is incredible, and therefore it must in fact have been designed. Like, there's no way that level of complexity and tightness of fit could have been produced through random mutation and selection. And yet, it is very much the orthodoxy of evolutionary theory, with pretty good evidence now. We've actually been able to take the evolutionary development of eyeball over a long period of time and identify the stages it's gone through, that actually is what happened. Right? So we have the extremely complex organ that does incredible stuff, lots of different moving parts, each one of which has very fine coordination, like small deviations cause catastrophic effects, developed entirely by bottoms-up forces, right? Random mutation and selection. So then what I want you to do is take that concept of the eyeball and just slide it over into culture space. And so what kinds of objects, what kind of organs have been developed in culture through the same mechanisms of random mutation and selection? And what are the eyeballs in culture space? And the hypothesis is that it might be very, very complex, very sophisticated, very nuanced, very subtle, very well fitted to things. And if I can hold that as for me it's a visual image, and think about that as a bottoms-up conspiracy, an emergent conspiracy, a phenomenon that coordinates people's actions and choices on the basis of some kind of shared field of incentives and a fitness landscape that itself coordinates those choices, then I get a big chunk of explanation for lots of phenomena. In fact, maybe potentially all. Like I might actually notice that the power of an evolutionary model allows me to take things that I would have thought of as being top-down conspiracies, and I can actually flip them and have them be bottoms-up conspiracies. I'll give you an example. I don't know if you've watched the movie The Big Short. By the way, if you haven't, you should. It's really a great movie. But just think about that. As far as we can tell, there really was no classic top-down conspiracy in the financial, the real estate bubble of 2006, 7, 8. Instead, it was a very large mass, like across a very large number of people, coordinated by shared incentives, by some game theoretic constructs, by a fitness landscape that shaped the entire event such that we ended up getting an emergent conspiracy in the direction of a massive and highly fraudulent real estate market with derivatives and secondary derivatives that ultimately ended up collapsing the entire global economy. And this included things like the SEC, it included the bonds agencies, it included the entire journalism industry that tracks and talks about the financial markets. It included hedge funds, it included large banks, it included real estate companies, like all of these different institutions and entities and the people inside of them, without any top-down coordination, and in fact without any particular awareness of collective action, were coordinated very much like an evolving ecosystem towards a particular location in the fitness landscape of sort of short-term thinking, externalize all harm and extract as much opportunity as possible, like a small number of basic principles. So to the maximum extent possible, inure benefit to me and externalize consequence outside of me. Think only in short term. Engage in optionality games. Operate always within the zone of plausible deniability. And push all envelopes and watch as envelopes move so you can continue pushing, but never go outside. Like that's kind of it. And if you do that, and across everybody playing that game more or less simultaneously, each position in the game, you begin to notice the entire game starts to shift to a certain direction, as if it were planned from the top down. So big, large, huge, impactful events can occur that coordinate hundreds, thousands, millions of people, even like people who were, remember the scene with the, I think it was a stripper in Florida where she had like 7 properties and was falsifying her applications. In some sense, she was a member and a participant, an agent in the conspiracy, but bottoms up. Right? She had no awareness of the notion there was a conspiracy. She was just following her local incentives and her local sense making, and thereby contributing to a phenomenon. Okay, so take those two frames. Right? Take the concept of the presence and reality and possibility of certain scopes, depth, complexity, and duration of top-down conspiracy. And then perhaps a new notion of how bottoms-up evolutionary constructs can generate emergent conspiracy. and then also bring them into relationship. Right? If I'm sitting here, if you're sitting there, and you have this set of concepts, one of the things that you might do is think about, I don't really ever need to engage in top-down coordination at a high level. All I need to do is have a meaningful capacity for forward planning and an eye for where the fitness landscape is going, and then nudge. Right? So I don't necessarily have to do, just think about Michael Burr and the credit default swaps. I don't need to do a whole lot. I just need to notice there's a particular location called the credit default swap, which if I can cause that to exist, so that's a top-down conspiracy. Right? I work with Goldman Sachs and I don't know who else, JP Morgan, to create this new financial object. That's top-down. Right? That is a top-down intentional strategic maneuver. But almost all the rest of the coordination is actually happening according to a bottoms-up conspiracy, an emergent conspiracy. But because I can see it, and I can see it better than other people, I can nudge its directionality. Now that coordination, that loop between some number of strategic agents who are intentionally endeavoring to actually nudge and cultivate emergent conspiracies, right, without any particular coordination between themselves, but now using strategic intent on conspiracy space itself. Right? That recursion is the key. They're using strategic intent not on base world. They're using strategic intent on bottoms-up conspiracies. That's the big conspiracy. Right? That's the powerful one, because that creates a strong linkage. I can actually have a lot of leverage in the world if I'm noticing that I'm aware of the fact that even though I don't talk to this guy over here, I don't necessarily even know who he is, but I can imagine there's a strategic actor somewhere over in, let's go with mortgage bond rating agency space, whose incentive structures is that he's going to be making strategic decisions on his own. And I can predict that these are the choices that he would make if he's me. And I can hypothesize that he's there. I can engage in a de facto, an implicit conspiracy with this individual who may not even exist. It may actually just be a function of what might happen in that niche. But I can imagine and model that it's likely to happen probabilistically and then start making my own choices locally in coordination with that probability. And of course, if there really is some individual or group of people, or frankly, a probability over there, it can begin engaging in strategic actions in coordination with the probability over here. That thing in the middle now, the relationship between the bottoms up and the top down, becomes the strongest form of what would actually be properly named a conspiracy. So that's actually, I think, some pretty deep code.